The smell of reheated coffee has a particular sadness to it when you're drinking it alone at 7 in the morning, watching the bird feeder outside your kitchen window and pretending that's enough. That was the 42nd morning in a row I had done exactly that. I am 68 years old. I live in a house on a quiet street in Guelph, Ontario, the same house I moved into with my husband 31 years ago. The same house where my daughter learned to walk on hardwood floors that still creak in the same three places. My husband passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. After he was gone, it was just me in this house and the bird feeder he built the summer before he got sick. My daughter's name is Stephanie. She is 39. She married a man named Brent 4 years ago, and they live 40 minutes away in a new subdivision outside of Kitchener, the kind of neighborhood where all the houses look like they were ordered from a catalog and the driveways are always freshly sealed. Brent works in commercial real estate. He has always been pleasant to my face and slightly distracted behind his eyes, the way people are when they're calculating something. I want to be fair to Stephanie. I want to say she was not always like this. She was a kind girl, thoughtful. She used to call me every Sunday without fail, even through university, even through the hard years after her father died. We used to sit at the same kitchen table and drink tea and talk for hours about nothing important and everything that mattered. I do not know exactly when things changed. Or maybe I do know, and I have just been slow to admit it. It started in small ways after the wedding. Stephanie stopped calling on Sundays. Then the calls became every other week, then once a month, then only when she needed something, a recipe, the name of her father's accountant, whether I still had the box of her grandmother's china in the basement, always practical, always with the purpose. And then, about 2 years ago, the subject of the house came up for the first time. Not directly. With Brent, things were never direct. It was always floated the way you let a kite out slowly, testing the wind before you commit to the string. We were having dinner at their place one evening, a Sunday roast that Stephanie had clearly stressed over, and Brent mentioned, very casually between bites, that property in my neighborhood had appreciated significantly. The detached home on my street had recently sold for just over $1.25 million. I said that was interesting and passed the gravy. He mentioned it again at Christmas. Then in March, he sent me an article from a real estate website, forwarded through Stephanie's email, with a note that said simply, "Have you thought about downsizing? We could help with the transition." I did not respond to the article. I should tell you what the house is. It is not just a house to me, not the way it might be a number on a spreadsheet to Brent. My husband and I bought it when we were 37 years old. We had saved for 11 years. We refinished the basement ourselves over 3 weekends with sore backs and bad music and a case of beer. We planted the maple tree in the front yard that now reaches the second-story window. I made my daughter's Halloween costumes on the sewing machine in the spare room upstairs. My husband died in the master bedroom, in our bed, with my hand in his. I was not going to sell the house. I said this to Stephanie, plainly, the following spring, when she drove over on a Saturday afternoon and sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands folded and told me she and Brent had been talking, that they were thinking about expanding his business, that they had an opportunity, a real opportunity, but they needed capital, that if I sold the house and moved somewhere smaller, maybe a condo in Waterloo, she could use her share of the inheritance early, while she was still young enough to build something with it. Her share of the inheritance. Those were the words she used. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the 40 minutes she had driven to sit at my table and say this to me. I thought about all the Sundays she had not called. I told her the house was not going anywhere, and neither was I. She left shortly after, and the drive home must have been tense because Brent called me himself the next morning. He was measured and reasonable on the phone, the way he always was, presenting things the way you present a business case, with logic and projections and the suggestion that emotion was getting in the way of a sensible decision. He said he understood I had sentimental attachment. He said that was natural. He said a good financial planner could help me see the full picture. I said I had a financial planner, thank you, and she had never once suggested I sell my home. He said he would send me some information, some options to think about. I said goodbye and hung up and sat for a while at the kitchen table. My neighbor Wendy had been through something similar with her son a few years back. We had talked about it over the fence enough times that I knew what was coming. Wendy had told me then, "You think it stops. It does not stop. You think they will respect the no. They will not respect the no. They will wait and they will come back. And each time it will be a little more urgent, a little more reasonable sounding, and a little more designed to make you feel like the unreasonable one." She was right. For the next year and a half, the pressure came in cycles. There would be a period of warmth. Stephanie would call more often, invite me for dinner, bring me flowers from their garden. And then, once I had softened a little, once I was glad again to have my daughter back, Brent would reappear in the conversation. A new angle. A new reason, estate planning, tax implications, the cost of home maintenance at my age, the suggestion, which he managed to make sound caring, that it was not safe for a woman alone to be in a big house. I maintained my position, but it cost me something each time. That is the part people do not talk about, the cost of standing your ground when the person pushing is someone you love. Then came my granddaughter Mia's graduation. Mia is Brent's daughter from his first marriage. She is 22 and she is studying environmental science at the University of Waterloo. I have always been fond of her, genuinely fond, not in a dutiful step-grandmother way, but in the real way, the way you are fond of someone because they are curious and kind, and they actually want to know what you think about things. She would call me sometimes just to talk. She told me once that she liked talking to me because I did not try to manage her. Mia graduated in June. Stephanie called me 3 weeks before to say they were having a dinner afterward at a restaurant in Uptown Waterloo, a reservation for 12, the immediate family. She told me what time to arrive and what the dress code was, and that I should park in the garage on the corner because street parking was a nightmare. I was happy to go. I bought me a card and tucked some money inside and ordered a small succulent in a painted pot because I knew she liked plants, and I drove 40 minutes and paid $9 for parking and walked into that restaurant feeling genuinely glad. The host brought me to the table. Brent's parents were there, his sister and her husband, a couple I did not recognize who turned out to be friends of Brent's from his golf club. Mia was there, already seated, and she stood up and hugged me and told me the succulent was perfect. I found my seat. The seat was at the end of the table, not near Stephanie, who was seated at the center beside Brent, not near Mia, who was at the head. At the far end, beside Brent's father, whom I had met twice before, and a woman I did not know who spoke mostly to the person on her other side. I told myself it was just a seating arrangement. I told myself it meant nothing. Then dinner began. Stephanie did not come to speak to me. Brent gave a speech about Mia and did not mention me. When the waiter came around for drink orders, he skipped me and I had to raise my hand. Small things. The kind of things you could dismiss individually, the kind of things that together make you understand very clearly that you are not at the center of this evening. You are not, in fact, particularly welcome at this evening. You are here because not inviting the grandmother would have looked bad. I understood all of this by the time the appetizers arrived. I ate my soup. I talked to Brent's father about his garden. I smiled at Mia across the table when she caught my eye. When the main course came, Stephanie finally walked over. Not to sit with me, but to stand behind my chair for a moment and squeeze my shoulder and say, "Thanks for coming, Mum," in the way you thank someone for attending an obligation. I drove home in the dark and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. Wendy was at her front door the next morning when I took out the recycling. She took one look at my face and said, "Come have coffee." So I did, and I sat at her kitchen table, which is yellow and warm, and I told her about the dinner, and she listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about Wendy. She does not rush to reassure you. She lets you say the whole thing first. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do about the house?" I said I had not decided yet. She said, "You should decide before they decide for you." 3 days after the graduation dinner, Stephanie called. I want to be precise about this because the timing matters. 3 days, not a week, not after some period of reflection or conversation about the evening. 3 days. She called on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the garden. I had dirt on my gloves and I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. She asked how I was. I said fine. She asked if I had enjoyed the dinner. I said it was a lovely evening for Mia. There was a pause. Then she said she had been thinking and she and Brent had talked and they really felt the time had come to have a serious conversation about the house. Not pressure, she said, just a real conversation. Because things were moving fast with Brent's business and the market was still strong, and if I was ever going to do this, now was a good time. I stood in the garden with my dirty gloves and listened. She said there was a condo development in Waterloo that had just been listed. 2 bedrooms, 1 level, maintenance free, very manageable. She said she could arrange for me to see it that weekend if I was open to it. I asked her if she remembered the graduation dinner 3 days ago. She said yes, of course. I asked if she thought that dinner had gone well. There was a pause. She said she thought it had been a nice evening. I said, "Stephanie, you seated me at the end of the table and you spoke to me once for 30 seconds. I drove 40 minutes and I sat beside people I had never met and I watched you not look at me for 2 hours." Another pause. Longer. She said it had been a complicated seating arrangement, that she had not intended to make me feel unwelcome, that she was sorry if I had read it that way. If I had read it that way, I told her I needed to think and I would call her back. I hung up and stood in the garden for a long time. The maple tree was full and green. I had planted it as a sapling 31 years ago, barely taller than my knee. My husband had dug the hole in the wrong spot the first time, and we had argued about it, a small, sharp argument that lasted 20 minutes and then dissolved into laughter because, of course, it was not really about the tree. I went inside and I called my lawyer. Her name is Sandra, and I have known her for 12 years. She is practical and warm, and she does not waste words. I told her what I wanted to do, and she listened carefully, and then she asked me several questions, methodical and specific, and at the end she said she thought it was a reasonable and well-considered decision, and she could have the paperwork ready within 2 weeks. We met in her office on a Wednesday morning. It smelled like paper and coffee and faintly of the lilac bush that grew against the window outside. She walked me through everything carefully. I had already looked into it on my own, done some reading, called the estate planning section of the Ontario Bar Association's referral line one afternoon when I needed to hear it from a stranger, someone with no stake in the outcome. I made a new will. I also placed the house into a trust. I want to explain this because the woman at Brent's golf dinner would not have known about it, but Wendy's son, who is a chartered accountant, had explained it to me over her yellow kitchen table one afternoon 6 months earlier. A properly structured trust means the house no longer moves through a conventional estate process. It cannot be pressured out of me while I am alive because I remain in it on my own terms. And when I am gone, it will go where I have decided it will go, which is in part to Mia, who I believe will care about what a home means, and in part to a housing charity in Guelph that helps women who have nowhere to go. I did not tell Stephanie any of this when I called her back. I called on a Thursday evening, a week after the garden conversation. She answered on the second ring. She asked if I had thought about the condo. I told her I had been doing a lot of thinking, yes. I told her I had met with Sandra. She was quiet. I told her the house was handled, that she did not need to worry about it anymore, that everything had been arranged in a way that made sense to me, and it was done. She asked what that meant. I told her it meant the house was handled. Another pause. I could hear something in the background at her end, a television, or maybe Brent's voice in another room. Then she asked, very carefully, whether she would be inheriting the house. I did not answer immediately. I had thought about how I wanted to say this. I'd written a few versions in my head over those 2 weeks, something long and explanatory. Something that laid out all the reasons, the Sunday calls that stopped, the graduation dinner, the years of being made to feel like a problem to be solved. Something that expressed the grief of it, because there is grief in this, real grief, the kind that does not make headlines. In the end, I said 4 words. The house is protected, she said. What does that mean? I said it means what it means. There was a long silence. Then she said my name the way children say their parents' names when they are very young and want something and cannot find another way to ask. I said, Stephanie, I love you. I have always loved you, and I am not going to explain this further tonight. I set the phone down. I did not sleep well. I want to be honest about that. I lay in the dark in the house I have lived in for 31 years, and I thought about my daughter as the small child, the way she used to fall asleep in the car and I would carry her inside, the specific weight of her head against my shoulder. I thought about her sitting at the foot of her father's hospital bed, holding his hand. I thought about all the versions of her that I have loved. Loving someone and protecting yourself from them is not a contradiction. It took me a long time to understand this. It took me longer than it should have. But at 68 years old, in a house that holds every important thing that has ever happened to me, I finally understand it. Brent called the following morning. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was careful and measured, as he always was, and I listened to it once and then deleted it. Stephanie called that evening, I answered. She was quieter than I expected. She did not mention the house. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She asked if I was going to Wendy's birthday thing the following weekend. I said I was planning to. There was a pause that was different from the other pauses, less loaded, and she said that she might come too, if that was all right. I said that would be very all right. We talked for a while. Not about anything that mattered, not the way we used to, not yet. But the call lasted 22 minutes, which was longer than anything in the past 3 years. And when we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for a while, holding the phone, looking at the bird feeder in the late evening light. I do not know what comes next. I do not know if Stephanie and I will find our way back to Sunday afternoons and long conversations about nothing important. I do not know if Brent will eventually accept that this particular project is closed. I hope my daughter will understand someday that I was not protecting the house from her. I was protecting everything the house stands for, from everyone who had stopped seeing it as a home and started seeing it as an asset. My husband built the bird feeder the summer before he got sick. Cedar, painted red, with a little copper roof that has gone green with age. It needs repainting. I keep meaning to do it, and then I sit down with my coffee and the birds come and I think, maybe tomorrow. Tomorrow. I have plenty of those left. What is yours is not what you were given. It is what you refuse to let be taken. I've thought about that Tuesday afternoon in the garden many times since. The dirt on my gloves, the phone in my hand, Stephanie's voice, careful and practiced, the way it always was when she and Brent had rehearsed the conversation ahead of time. What strikes me now is not the anger I felt in that moment. I had moved past the anger long before that call. What strikes me is how long I had been willing to absorb things I should not have absorbed, to excuse what did not deserve excusing, because the person doing it was my daughter, and I loved her, and I kept waiting for the version of her I remembered to come back. That is not wisdom. I know that now. That is just fear dressed up as patience. There is something that happens when you raise a child and you give them everything you have. You tell yourself it is love, and it is love, but somewhere in the giving you can lose the thread of who you are apart from them. I lost that thread for a while. I let the house become a negotiating point. I let my own home, the place where my husband died and my daughter grew up and my life happened, become something I had to defend rather than simply inhabit. I let that go on for 2 years before I did anything about it. What finally moved me was not the graduation dinner, though that was the sharpest thing. It was sitting in my driveway afterward, in the dark, and realizing I was ashamed. Not of anything I had done, of how small I had let myself become in the presence of my own child. The decision I made after that was not about punishment. I want to be clear about that. I did not place the house in trust to hurt Stephanie or to send a message to Brent. I did it because it was the right thing to do, because a home that holds 31 years of a life deserves to be protected with clarity and intention, not left vulnerable to whoever applies the most sustained pressure. Because Mia, who calls me to talk about things that matter, deserved to know that I had thought carefully about what happens when I am gone. And because the women's housing charity on the other side of town deserved to benefit from a decision made with a clear head rather than a guilty one. That is what I mean when I think about doing right by the people who come after you. It is not a dramatic gesture, it is just being honest about your values when it counts, and then following through with them even when it is uncomfortable. Even when the person who would have benefited from your weakness is someone you love. I do not know what Stephanie understood from those 4 words. I do not know if she has sat with what happened at that dinner and looked at it clearly. But I know that the call 3 days later, the one that lasted 22 minutes and had nothing to do with property, was the first honest call we had had in years. And I know that a conversation without an agenda underneath it feels completely different from one that has one. The maple tree my husband planted is 41 years old this summer. It did not get to be that size by asking permission. It just kept growing in the direction it needed to grow, through the cold and the drought and the years nobody was paying attention to it. I think about that sometimes when I sit with my coffee in the morning. Just keep growing. Just keep your roots where they belong.